Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm responding to a video that I'm going to be handling a little differently than normal. It's just a list of 100 questions that this person has for atheists. Since they don't read the list aloud or do any sort of presentation of any kind aside from just listing the questions, then rather than this being a typical response video, I will just be going through the list of questions. I am not going to be linking to the original video for this one, just because it comes from such a small channel, and usually my purpose for doing that is so that you can go and make sure I'm not removing context from anything, and since these questions are all numbered, there's not really much risk of that. Also, there's a lot of them, so I will try to keep my answers brief, but I will be doing this in 2 parts at least in order to fit them all in. Let's go! Question 1. Why don't you believe in God? Well, for the God concept in general, it's because I see no evidence that requires God as an explanation, and for the Christian God in particular, I already have a 43-minute video explaining some of why I don't believe in that one. So I'll leave a card in the corner and a link down below if you want more detail on that, but to give the elevator pitch version, the God described by Christians is not compatible with the God described by the Bible, and the God described by the Bible is internally inconsistent and logically incoherent. Question 2. Where is your evidence that God does not exist? I don't need evidence that God does not exist any more than you need evidence that the flying spaghetti monster does not exist. It is simply enough that I have yet to see anything that would sufficiently convince me of God's existence. Though, again, this does change depending on what God we're talking about. That's my stance on the general God concept, but specific to the Christian God, I have what I would consider to be sufficient evidence to say confidently that that God does not, in fact, exist. Question 3. Why do you hate God? I don't. At least, not any more than I hate Emperor Palpatine, Sauron, or the Xenomorph. They are all characters that, were they to exist in reality, would deserve a certain amount of hate, but as it stands, I merely recognize them as characters that represent evil, much like God, actually. They're actually better characters than God. The thing about literature and storytelling is that you can love a character that you know is supposed to be the quote-unquote bad guy, if they are written in a compelling way. This makes me think of the 2008 movie Good, starring Viggo Mortensen and Jason Isaacs. Viggo's character, John Halder, is a good person who is just living a normal life in Germany during the rise of the Nazis. But by the end of the movie, he ends up being an SS officer who is inspecting concentration camps. You hate what he has become by the end of the movie, but every decision that leads him there is something that we can all empathize with, even if we disagree with it. He is a compelling character that we end up hating, while appreciating the character development and storytelling that goes into the character. The character of God, though, as presented by the Bible, is not terribly compelling or interesting. Not to me, anyway. This is a rather subjective assessment, after all. Question 4. Do you believe in the existence of Jesus? Yeah, I think the character of Jesus as described in the Bible was probably based on a real guy, though I would agree that it's not outside the realm of possibility that he was a completely mythical invention. I think him being based on a real guy is more plausible than that. Question 5. If no, where is your evidence that Jesus didn't exist? Well, as stated, I believe he probably did, but if you want the other side of the argument, I'll leave a link to Apologia's video featuring Godless Engineer, where he breaks down the case from Mythicism. Question 6. Why do you hate Jesus? There is an awful lot of assumption going on in these questions. The purpose of asking questions should be to learn from the answers. So rather than assuming that I hate God and Jesus and then asking why I hate them, how about you start with, do you hate God or Jesus? And then follow that up with, if yes, then why? To answer the question, see my previous answer about hating God. Question 7. Have you ever read the Bible? Well, I haven't read every single word of it. I have read most of it. I've read the entire New Testament, the entire Pentateuch, most of the former and minor prophets, and a healthy chunk of the remaining books that are generally referred to as the writings, but that is the section that I've read the least of. I definitely know the greatest hits. Question 8. Do you believe that people have souls? No, I don't believe that souls exist. Question 9. If no, where is your evidence? The reversal of the burden of proof will be a recurring theme in this video. So let me reframe this by turning it around. Where is your evidence that everybody doesn't have a spiritual penis that is the cause of everyone's sex drive, with some people having a stronger spiritual penis than others? You don't have any evidence that such a thing does not exist, but it would be ridiculous to believe it nonetheless. Question 10. Do you reject all gods, or just the Christian God? I reject all gods. The Christian God is just the one that I happen to be the most familiar with. Question 11. Why do you care so much about what other people believe? Well, generally I'm a pretty live and let live kind of guy, but the thing is, beliefs impact actions, and as we've been seeing so much recently, religious beliefs have this tendency to impact political actions, which will then end up affecting people who don't share those beliefs. So, if y'all just kept your beliefs to yourself and didn't try to make everybody who disagrees with you act them out, then we wouldn't need to spend so much time explaining why your beliefs are not just wrong, but also harmful. Question 12. Where do you get your sense of right and wrong from? Empathy. I know what it is like to feel bad. I don't like feeling bad, so I try to avoid making other people feel bad. Question 13. What evidence would persuade you that God exists? Well, with apologies for being so cliché about it, I don't know. But if God exists, then God does know, and if he wants me to believe in him, then he is perfectly capable of providing the evidence that he knows would persuade me. Question 14. Why are you against the idea of faith? Well, to put it bluntly, if you have evidence, then faith is irrelevant. I can't think of a single scenario where believing something based on faith instead of evidence would be superior. Of course, then apologists will claim that faith is not belief without evidence, but then I would ask, if faith is belief with sufficient evidence, then why is the word faith even needed in the first place? And what is it then that distinguishes faith from evidence-based belief? It seems to me that faith is one of those words that morphs to fit the situation. When talking to fellow believers who might be having doubts, they just need to have faith. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the convictions of things not seen. Just have faith. But when talking to a skeptic, faith suddenly becomes a synonym for trust based on previous experiences, or a stand-in for belief with sufficient evidence. Personally, when it comes to words like faith, I'd rather just ditch the word and say what we mean. The word itself causes confusion rather than clearing things up. Question 15. Why do you attack Christians? Well, generally speaking, I don't. I do attack Christianity quite frequently, and there are certain practices that Christians do and beliefs that Christians hold that I will attack, but generally I try not to attack the person, with a small handful of rare exceptions from people who have earned it by just being shitty people. But they are the exception rather than the rule, and their Christianity is not why I attack those particular people. It's because of their behavior, which, yes, is often informed by their particular interpretation of Christianity, but I think you get the idea. People are not ideas. You can attack one without it being an attack on the other. Question 16. Why do you hate Christians? I don't. In fact, there are a number of them that I would go so far as to say that I love. I don't hate my mother. I don't hate my aunt and uncle. I don't hate Paul. No, none of the Pauls that you guys know, a different one. Even the Christians that I don't like, the Matt Powells and Kent Hovens of the world, unless I'm working on a video, I don't spend any time thinking about them. Hate implies a certain level of dedication to disliking them at all times, but when I walk away from the script that I'm writing, I have better things to do with myself than waste energy thinking about how much I don't like these people. Question 17. Why do you mock and scoff at Christians? I feel like this is a repeat of question 15, so ibid, but pretend that 16 doesn't exist, because the way ibid works, that would actually make it the same as the answer for 16, which it's not. Whatever, you know what I mean. See question 15 is what I'm trying to say. Ibid's supposed to simplify things. Why'd I do this to myself? Question 18. Are you aware that you are fulfilling biblical prophecy? 2 Peter 3 verses 3 through 4 says, "Know this, first of all, that in the last days mockers will come with their mocking, following after their own lusts and saying, 'Where is the promise of his coming?' For ever since the fathers fell asleep, all continues just as it was from the beginning of creation." Yes, I am aware of the Bible verses saying that Christians will be mocked and people won't believe them. This is what's called a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I were to write down in this script right now that there will be those who do not believe that my cat is inflated like a balloon and floated around the house for several days until we could safely vent her gas, and then people later don't believe that, would you say that that is a fulfilled prophecy? Or is it just a safe bet that a new incredible claim will not be universally accepted? Because after writing that there would be people who do not believe it, I decided to put it to the test. I posted that on Twitter, and within minutes, I got a response from someone saying they won't believe it until I can provide evidence. I mean, if you want, we could go into the details about how the last days were supposed to be the days of the disciples of Jesus, with him promising to return before the last of them had died, but barring an immortal disciple wandering around somewhere, it's pretty safe to say that Jesus broke that promise. So, yeah, where is the promise of his coming? Question 19. Why do you want to stop people from believing in God? Short answer, I don't. I don't care if people believe in God as long as they're able to keep their belief out of the public square. I'm not saying they can never talk about God, I'm saying they shouldn't be using their belief in God to influence things like politics, or to bother people who aren't interested in hearing about it. Use the penis metaphor. Religion is like a penis. It's okay to have one, it's okay to be proud of it, it's okay to share it with people who are giving enthusiastic consent, but do not wave it around in public and do not shove it in anyone's face if they don't agree beforehand. Question 20. Why do you give Muslims a pass? I don't. I don't really focus on them because I live in Canada where Islam is not very prevalent. I focus on what I know. I used to be a Christian. I know Christianity. I understand the mindset of a Christian because I used to have the same mindset. I can empathize with the points that are being made even when I disagree with them because I remember what it was like to agree with them. My perspective and lived experiences allow me to speak about Christianity with more authority than I ever could with Islam because I wasn't raised a Muslim. But you want me to condemn Islam? Sure, I condemn Islam. There are bad things in the Quran, and there are imams who teach bad things, and I do not give those bad ideas a pass. I just don't see them nearly as often as I see Christianity. This is another spot in the questions where the asker is just assuming things that they don't know about those who will answer. They assume that all atheists just fit in with the Fox News lefty atheist commie straw man, who for some reason just absolutely love everything that Islam does. In reality, I have yet to meet any atheist with a position so lacking in nuance as that. Question 21. Why do you pretend to have all the answers? I don't. I'm perfectly happy saying I don't know when that is the honest answer to a question. That's where learning begins. You can't learn something new if you refuse to admit that you didn't know it to begin with. How boring would life be if we really did have all the answers? I love learning, so to me it's exciting that there will always be things that I do not know. Flip it around, though, and why do apologists insist on answering every question to which the answer should be I don't know with God instead of I don't know, let's learn what the answer might be? Question 22. Why do you claim to be skeptical when you are unwilling to change your mind? How do you know that I'm unwilling to change my mind? I arrived at the position that I am at now through a cascade of mind changes that took place over many years. Pro tip, when asking questions of groups of people, it's best not to assume in the question that you know things like this, because that just makes it look like you're lumping all atheists together as a homogenized group and are just looking through the responses in order to find a gotcha answer rather than honestly seeking answers. Question 23. Why do you go after Christian museums that are just trying to tell the truth? I don't really. I don't know that I even have one video on my channel that focuses specifically on any particular Christian museum. But most of the Christian museums that I'm aware of don't actually have much in the way of truth in them. Whether we're talking about the Museum of the Bible with all their forgeries, Carl Baugh's Creation Museum that is so bad that other creationists post warnings not to use his material, Kent Hovind's compound, Ken Ham's landlocked boat, whatever you got, every single one of these museums is dedicated to spreading lies and misinformation. Now, if I'm generous, I could say that they don't know that they are lies and misinformation, so they might be honestly trying to tell the truth, but the fact of the matter is that they are failing to tell the truth. Question 24. How can you claim to be agnostic and atheist at the same time? This one risks going into definition fight territory that just doesn't interest me, but to simplify, technically speaking, it's not possible to know with 100% certainty that no iteration of any god could possibly exist. Agnostic is a measure of certainty. If you are 99% certain there are not gods, then you are technically agnostic, since there is a 1% uncertainty. But for all intents and purposes, you're still an atheist. And there are variations on this. I'm sure plenty of people will disagree with me, but at the end of the day, I don't give a fuck. Define your God, and I'll tell you why I don't believe in that one. If you manage to define it in a way that is consistent with reality, then maybe I'll change my mind, but I don't consider that to be a very likely scenario based on the definitions of God that I've seen thus far. Question 25. Why do you reject people's personal experiences? Well, reject could mean multiple things here. I'm going to take this to mean reject them as evidence, and I do that because experiences are subjective and unreliable. Our brains play tricks on us all the time. They can be fooled by drugs, alcohol, how tired you are, how close you are to either falling asleep or waking up, what mood you're currently in, lines in certain patterns, and so much more. I have yet to hear an account of a personal experience that is powerful enough to conclude that it would not have been the result of any of these effects, or one of the myriad of other effects that are known to affect our brains. Question 26. If atheism is just an opinion, why do you behave like it is a fact?
Yeah, well, that's just like your opinion, man.
Now, I think this question is trying to poke at the idea of relative truth. That idea that apologists are always pushing that atheists don't believe that truth exists. Yeah, this is just demonstrating the problem with getting your information about a group exclusively from people that are not members of that group. I behave as though atheism is a fact because, as far as I can determine, it is a fact. Question 27. How do you square the fact that some of the most evil people in history are atheists? Example, Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Jeffrey Dahmer, Ted Bundy, Jim Jones, etc. Well, for starters, a good chunk of the people on that list were not actually atheist. Jim Jones may have privately been an atheist, but he was literally leading a cult of people who believed that he was God's vessel on earth. He would not have been able to do what he did without Christianity laying the groundwork. Ted Bundy was either a Mormon or a Methodist. He was raised Methodist, was baptized as a Mormon, and when asked about his religious preferences after his arrest, answered Methodist. Jeffrey Dahmer may or may not have been an atheist when committing the crimes, but a quick conversion after his arrest and a measly 2 years of prison, and now, according to Christian theology, he is in heaven enjoying eternal paradise, while several of his victims burn in hell. So, if you think he was a monster for doing what he did to those people, how can you think that the God that rewards Dahmer and continues to torture Dahmer's victims is anything but a monster himself? Also, for what it's worth, the guy who killed him said that God told him to do it, so there's that. Stalin and Mao, sure, I'll let them keep the atheist label. And Hitler was a man who repeatedly invoked God in Mein Kampf, had his birthday celebrated by the Roman Catholic Church, frequently invoked God in his speeches, and had soldiers in all branches of the military wearing belt buckles that declared "God with us" in German. An argument could be made that Hitler was really an atheist and was merely using religion as a tool, but here's the thing. Why would an atheist need to use religion as a tool to do massive harm if atheism were actually the thing that was predisposed to causing massive harm? Do you think that the Crusades would have been better or worse if the church leaders at the time had access to modern weapons? This seems like more of a some people suck problem than an atheism problem, and it is quite telling that a lot of atheists who really suck see religion as a path to get lots more people to suck. As Steven Weinberg famously said, with or without religion, good people can behave well and bad people can do evil. But for good people to do evil, that takes religion. Question 28. Why do you believe in evilution? First, I love that he spells it evilution. That's a nice way to separate the creationist mischaracterization of evolution from what evolution actually is. Creationists aren't talking about evolution, they're talking about evolution. I forget who it was that messaged me about that a while back, so my apologies for not crediting you. But to answer the question, I accept evolution because the vast majority of the people who spend their entire lives studying biology, biological systems, genetics, etc., all agree that evolution happens. And I'm not arrogant enough to claim that all the experts in the field are wrong, so I must be right. Question 29. Where is your evidence for evolution? Some of the evidence can be found in my 12-part series called The Evidence for Evolution. There is much more evidence for evolution than what I gave in that series, but it's a good place to start. Question 30. Have you ever observed evolution? Yes, I have. An example that I've told my kids is that when I was learning how to drive, squirrels would often get hit by cars because when they saw a car coming, they would usually turn and run directly away from it, a la the Prometheus school of running away from things, all while zigzagging. That works against hawks, not so much against cars. Today, when a squirrel sees a car coming, it bolts straight across the street, wasting no time in getting out of the way. This is behavioral evolution. The squirrels who zigzagged were more likely to die, so they were less likely to have offspring before dying, while those who ran straight across were less likely to die, so had more offspring. Of course, the creationists will respond that that's obviously just an example of adaptation, not evolution. The squirrels are still squirrels, after all. But there's no functional difference between micro and macro evolution. They both operate by the same mechanisms. The difference is merely that of scale. Also, we have observed macroevolution as well. I just wanted to give an example that I have observed personally myself. Question 31. Do you believe in abiogenesis, panspermia, or creation? Of those three, my money's on abiogenesis. Question 32. If you believe in abiogenesis or panspermia, where is your evidence? Well, as I'm trying to keep this video short, rather than present the evidence for it here, I will link to the video that Professor Dave made responding to James' tour specifically on the subject of abiogenesis. Between part 1 and part 2 of that response, there is 2.5 hours of content, mostly going over a lot of the evidence that we have for abiogenesis. To grossly oversimplify, autocatalytic cycles are a thing that exists. Autocatalysis is a reaction where the catalyst of the reaction is also one of the products of the reaction, so the reaction produces more of what caused the reaction in the first place. As these reactions continue, they can increase in complexity, starting with something as simple as an inorganic salt at the beginning and ending up with simple organic molecules before building into more complex organic molecules. As mentioned, this is a gross oversimplification, but like I said, I am trying to keep my answers short. Go watch Dave eviscerate James' tour for more information on that. Question 33. What was the first life form? I don't know. Question 34. Where did the first life come from? It would have developed through the evolution of self-replicating non-living molecules. Notably, life is not a concept that has a completely solid definition, so it would be hard to figure out exactly what the first life form would have been, as the line between self-replicating molecules and life is quite blurry. Question 35. Could the first life form reproduce on its own? Yes, ability to reproduce is one part of the definition of life that is consistent. Of course, this is with regards to general rather than specific ability. Someone who is infertile doesn't stop being considered alive because they cannot reproduce. Though, I feel like this question was probably inspired by the Kent Hovind line where he jokes about the first of something having to find a mate, so there had to be two of the same species evolving spontaneously at the same time. But notably, the first organism to ever exist definitely would have reproduced asexually, as most organisms today still do. Question 36. Did the first life form have DNA? I'm not entirely sure, but I think the consensus on that one is no. I believe that RNA is still favored as being potentially the first genetic molecule, due largely to its ability to catalyze its own replication, and its ability to fold itself like a protein. I might be wrong on that point though, and maybe the first thing that would have been considered alive didn't even have RNA. I don't know how likely that is, but it's not outside the realm of possibility. Question 37. Did the first life form seek out food, or did it use photosynthesis? Again, I'm not an expert, but my understanding is that the first life probably used chemosynthesis, using chemicals from its environment as the source of energy, which I guess could be considered seeking out food. But my question for you here is, why do you expect atheists to have all these answers when earlier you seemed annoyed that atheists pretend that they do have all the answers? Maybe we're just more educated in these matters because ignorant theists keep looking for things that we don't know so that they can shove God in that knowledge gap. Question 38. Are viruses alive? This is an interesting question. It depends on how you define life, but most biologists would likely say no, because they don't grow, they are made fully formed. They don't have a metabolism, they are not made of cells, they can't reproduce by themselves. But the fact that this isn't a completely settled matter kinda speaks to the fuzziness of the line between living material and non-living material. Question 39. Why do you believe in the Big Bang Theory? As with evolution, it's because that's where the evidence points, and the consensus among cosmologists is that the Big Bang happened. I'm not smart enough to figure out where the cosmologists might have gone wrong, so I stick with the consensus of experts. Question 40. Where is your evidence for the Big Bang? In space, mostly. The cosmic microwave background radiation, or CMBR, the expansion of space, and the proportion of the various elements that are observed in space are the three main lines of evidence for the Big Bang. The CMBR was predicted by Big Bang theory years before it was observed, so that observation confirmed the prediction. The expansion of space causes everything to be moving away from us, and the farther away it is, the faster it appears to be moving, because there's more space in between us and it to be expanding. And the only way for that to work without it being the space in between the stars doing the expanding would be for the Earth to be the center of the universe, which is just preposterous. And the Big Bang Theory makes predictions about the formation of the elements, basically that the universe would mostly be made up of hydrogen and helium, with smaller proportions of everything else, and that is what we see when we examine the universe around us. Question 41. Did you observe the Big Bang? No, I did not. But we have observed the CMBR, which was essentially the first flash of light that happened when the universe first turned transparent after the Big Bang. The existence of the CMBR was predicted by Big Bang Theory years before it was observed in the only form of prophecy that actually exists, scientific prediction. And keep your eyes on the science news. We're actually looking to detect the gravitational wave equivalent of the CMBR, with the idea being that the universe is old enough that so many galaxies, and their supermassive black holes, should have collided by now so that there would be a background of gravitational waves that permeate the whole universe. The problem is that the wavelengths for these gravitational waves would be so long that we would need a gravitational wave detector that is about the size of a galaxy in order to actually find them. So researchers have begun using distant pulsars as a kind of naturally occurring gravitational wave detector. Barring some unforeseen complication, I imagine that in the next few years we will manage to detect the cosmic gravitational wave background of the universe, which would be a discovery that wouldn't directly relate to the Big Bang as such, but would at least serve to demonstrate that the universe has to be old enough for these galactic collisions to have occurred. Not that there's any question about the age of the universe at this point, this would just be another drop in the bucket of evidence that the universe is billions of years old. Question 42. What is the answer to life, the universe, and everything? Sorry, couldn't help myself. Why do you believe the Earth is millions of years old? Again, evidence, radiometric dating, geology, astronomy, cosmology, paleontology, etc., etc., etc. Question 43. Where is your evidence for the Earth being millions of years old? This question seems like filler. It's essentially the same as the last one, so ibid. I used it right this time. Yay! Question 44. How old are you? Okay, yeah, we've arrived at the filler questions. That's okay, 100 questions was pretty ambitious, so the occasional fluffy question is fine. I'm currently 35. Question 45. Why do you reject the historical flood as described in Genesis? A myriad of reasons. There's not enough water, adding the amount of water needed would have ended up vaporizing all life, including Noah and the animals. The mechanics of how the tectonic plates would have to have worked during the flood would have resulted in the entire Earth being turned into a molten ball for millions of years. There's no geologic record of any such flood. The multiple flood stories that were mashed together in the Bible are completely contradictory, and so many more reasons. So many more. Question 46. Where is your evidence that the flood didn't happen? Ibid. Question 47. Why do you reject the story of the Garden of Eden? Because I don't believe in talking snakes, men made out of dirt, women made out of ribs, fruit that can magically imbue anyone who eats it with knowledge, more magic fruit that can give you eternal life, an autonomous fire sword guarding the gates, and I could keep going. The story's just ridiculous. Question 48. Where is your evidence that the Garden of Eden didn't exist? Well, the fact that it doesn't exist now. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers somehow managed to survive the flood, but the magical garden with the fruit of eternal life being guarded by the cherubim and an autonomous fire sword somehow didn't? Also, all of the aforementioned evidence for how the flood never happened applies here. Question 49. Why do you reject the sacrifice that Jesus made? Well, for a number of reasons. I don't believe Jesus was God, so his sacrifice doesn't have any bearing on my relationship with any potential God beings. And if Jesus were God, then it wasn't really a sacrifice, since he came back from the dead after about 40 hours, not even 2 full days. Jesus had a really shitty weekend for your sins. Not much of a sacrifice if you ask me. And I'm actually going to leave it there. He pivots into a bunch of Jesus stuff next, so that's a good topic shift, so we'll finish that off in a future part 2. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Gary Davis, who says, hand washing would have been a good thing to have in the Bible. Could have saved millions. Yup. A couple verses with instructions on when and for how long to wash, instead of rambling chapters about the fancy clothes that priests need to wear, could have done a lot of good. Thanks for watching, thanks to this week's PayPal hero Donna, and special thanks as always to my patrons, iOS Tilt Bill Gamer, Clint Eastwood, Mark McManus, Mark Hetcham, and all the rest, who are the answers to the many questions that are my channel. If you'd like to make some sense out of me, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino, or by supporting the channel in one of the other methods that can be found at links.vicerhino.com, which is also where you'll find links to my other projects. If for whatever reason you want to send me stuff, my P.O. Box address is in the description. See you next time!